Okay, and I'm Jenna Velez. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs at MHA Westchester, and we have been really excited to host these conversations around really important topics over the last couple months that are impacting our community. And tonight's is a topic that we hope will offer really a framework for understanding what our youth are experiencing right now, as well as some takeaways on how to help them navigate emotionally during these just really turbulent times. We have a panel of extraordinary individuals who are willing to share their expertise with us and their personal experience to help us do that tonight. Before I introduce them, I do just want to go over a few quick housekeeping items. So everybody's currently muted, and we encourage you to turn your cameras off in order to eliminate distractions. And we also find that if you put your settings to speaker view, it makes it easier for you to identify who is speaking, since we have a panel of individuals tonight. Who I'm going to introduce to you shortly. We're going to encourage you to participate during this conversation with a few polling questions tonight. So you're going to see, you'll have opportunity to answer those polling questions, but then we're also asking that you use the chat feature that you can click at the bottom of your screen to make comments and ask questions throughout the presentation. So no need to hold anything until the end. We really do want this to feel as much like a conversation as we can. And even though we're all physically separate right now, we really want it to feel that way rather than just presenting information. So please feel free to participate using that chat. And so now I'm going to introduce you to our panel. So we have Dr. Patricia Bragdun, who has over 25 years of experience working with adolescents and their families struggling with eating disorders, school refusal, anxiety, depression, substance use and abuse, self-harm, grief, and bereavement. Dr. Bragdun earned her master's degree from Columbia University, her PhD from New York University, and as a licensed clinical social worker who's worked at high schools for over 24 years, Dr. Bragdun is extremely skilled at interfacing with schools to help teens who have been academically impacted by their social, emotional, and behavioral issues. Dr. Bragdun has a special area of expertise and interest in death and dying, bereavement, and has earned a certificate of completion at Columbia University's Center for Complicated Grief. Dr. Bragdun is one of the founders of Ann's Place, a not-for-profit cancer support agency located in Danbury, Connecticut, and she has extensive knowledge working with individuals who are living with chronic long-term illness. She's a compassionate and dedicated advocate for individuals and families struggling with complex issues and emotions that impede everyday life. We also have Andrew Ecker. He is a coordinator disruptor at the Guidance and Child Study Center at Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES. His prior work includes school improvement positions, director and teacher at a therapeutic residential high school, adjunct graduate professor, and professional basketball player. He presents nationally and has authored articles on positive behavioral interventions and supports, school mental health, and special education. He was also just appointed as a rep to our New York State Education Department's Reopening Schools Regional Task Force on the Social Emotional Needs Committee. Then we also have Nicholas Granderson, who is one of MHA's amazing nurses. He works out of the White Plains Clinic. He's also a father of 4, the oldest of whom is joining him tonight. He's a football coach, and Nico is the oldest of his siblings who's joining him tonight. He's graduating from White Plains High School this month, so we want to say a big congratulations to both of you for reaching this important milestone. So that's our panel tonight. And before we get started, we also want to know who you are. So we are going to start with a quick polling question just to get a sense of who's in the room with us. So I am going to go ahead and share that poll question with you. And it's just going to ask you to identify, you know, what lens are you watching this through? And you can choose more than one. So if you're a parent and a healthcare provider or whatever, if you identify as multiple, that's fine too. We just kind of want to get a sense of who's in the room with us tonight. Okay, we have about 56% of people, 63. We'll keep the poll open for 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share those results with you. So, so it looks like we have almost 50% are parents, and well, actually, it's kind of hard. I guess there's people who are identifying as two of these things, but we've got parents, we have mental health professionals, education professionals, healthcare providers, other student. I guess, you know, Nico, maybe you didn't vote. You looks like you're our only student in the room tonight. But this is really helpful for us because it will help us to sort of frame the conversation as we go on. So thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bragdun so that she can frame some of the conversation that we're going to have tonight.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming, and really thank you for inviting me to talk about this topic. It's a topic that I have studied and have a passion about the effects of grief and loss and bereavement, and what are the differences and all the things that we struggle with, especially at a time like now. When we talk about grief and loss, we usually associate that with the death of someone close to us. And tonight we're going to talk more about the losses that some of us have experienced, many of us have experienced, especially students and parents during this, what I call a crisis that we're still in. We're still trying to find our way and work through it, and we really haven't come to the other side yet. So I want to just explain and give a brief overview of grief, a few things about it, and then I want to go into really some of the things that we may associate grief with what we're going through right now. So if you can bring up the first slide, I'll show you the definition, one of the definitions of grief. It involves a wide variation of emotions. It can go from laughter to despair, anger to acceptance. It can be experienced with the death of a person or the loss of an object. And what I'd like to talk about tonight is more of the loss of objects and experiences. Loss results in grief, and it occurs at many different times in our lifetime. It does not discriminate by age, culture, religion, or sexuality. When it happens, when we go through the grieving process, when we've experienced the death of someone who's close to us, or the loss of something that's very significant to us, we often think, again, of grief just related to death, but grief is related to many losses in our life, which we have throughout our life. So the next slide. Kubler-Ross really explained and did a tremendous amount of research in '69 and came up with 5 stages of grief. There's been a lot of work done regarding her 5 stages of grief, which many people have had some criticism of. I like to think of it as she was the pioneer in this work. And she talks about the 5 stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And in the beginning, I think that many people thought that you had to go through these stages on levels in order to get to the acceptance, and it doesn't really work that way. A person that I really have a lot of respect for is Dr. Wolfett, and one of his statements talks about grief is what we think and feel inside after someone we love dies. And it's an everyday experience, and it is. It's something that we can think we're through, and years later can come back and really remind us that we're still moving forward with it. We never get over it. We work through it. And So tonight, what I want to talk about is probably many people have felt distressed during this period of isolation, quarantine, multiple losses, and really that distress, I believe, is grief. And so, how do we think about this with all of the losses that we are currently thinking about? So, next slide. Just to name a few, these are some of the losses during the pandemic. And I'm so happy we have a student here and a parent tonight to talk about how some of these things may be affecting them in their life right now and in their family. But when we just look at this picture and we think about the things that have changed, that our experiences are not the same as they used to be. We think of things like sports. We think of empty classrooms now. School has changed and we have a fear of not knowing. We're anticipating more losses perhaps, maybe not going back to school. What will that look like? And it affects us in the same way when we think about the grieving process. The anticipatory grief is that a grief of the fear of losing something. And all of these things certainly are things that we have lost, and we don't know when we will get them back. I think one of the most concerning, I think, from what people have shared with me, is the loss of not being able to do traditional things. One of the things that I think has been probably one of the most hardest for families is the death of a loved one and not being able to do the traditional religious ceremonies, burial ceremonies, which has been extremely hard. For many people, their religion, their spiritual beliefs, their spirituality has been rocked. Simple things like going out for coffee, going on vacation, those things have all impacted us. And I think that when we really think about all of the losses that we've had, it's a tremendous distress. And although we focus a lot, and Nico, I don't mean to insult you because I'm so pleased that you did graduate today and you were able to enjoy that. You know, we forget about the little ones who are graduating from kindergarten and graduating from, you know, moving up from 5th grade or moving up from 8th grade. And it's just as sad for them. So we're going to continue in a wonderful conversation tonight, I hope, about how this has affected families and some of the things that maybe we can do to talk about your experiences and what we can do to maybe take care of ourselves a little bit better. So there you go.
Thank you so much. So actually, before I pass it over to Andrew, I do, you know, just given what you were talking about, I think we've all experienced losses, right? So, and I think that's important to frame too, is it's not just our kids, like we're all going through this together. And so we're gonna do another poll just so we can get a sense of what are the kinds of things that all of us who are in this, I keep saying in this room, we are here together. In this screen together, that what are the kinds of losses that you've experienced, just so we get a sense of, you know, what everybody has gone through in these last few months. So I'm just going to launch one more poll and ask if I'll keep it open for 30 seconds so you have time to answer. And you can again choose multiple here. Okay. Ooh, 72%. That's pretty good. All right, I'm going to share those results. So so just looking at this, I mean, it's rather sobering to look at. I mean, 19% of the people who are here experienced the death of a loved one during these last few months. And that in itself speaks volumes. And then loss of physical connection. I mean, I would imagine that's probably almost 100% of us with friends, family, canceled vacation plans, missed celebrations, canceled weddings, birthdays. 85% of us have missed those kinds of celebrations. And then there's some others that I think people are going to write into the chat here as well. Special ceremonies, son not being able to graduate pre-K, a fifth grader, loss of traditions, no moving up ceremony. So there's a lot of similarities here. So I think, you know, for all of us to kind of think that, I mean, I think that's always really helpful to know, hey, I'm not going through this alone. Andrew, if you want to share with us maybe now a little bit about what you, from the school perspective of, you know, what schools are thinking and how to respond to these losses that our students have experienced, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Thank you, Jenna, and everyone at MHA for having us. Can you hear me, Jenna?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. And Barbara and Nick for being here on the panel, and Nico, congratulations. It's awesome. And everyone for being here right now. I really appreciate you taking your time at the end of quarantine to still be on a Zoom, and at the end of the day at 7 o'clock. That's really an accomplishment. So thank you all so much for really caring about this and for being here. I want to kind of frame some of the things I think about in terms of the context for schools. I'm not in a school, but I support tens, if not a lot of schools across the region. And I learn from them, I learn from students, I learn from people like you. And I think that one thing that I've learned is just the importance of acknowledging the difficulties, acknowledging the losses that we've experienced, and also acknowledging the successes that we've had, no matter how seemingly small they are. Being here is a success. You know, waking up and doing this work, going to school, all of those things matter. And I just want to acknowledge that, and I hope that for each of us, even when things are really tough, that we can find those seemingly small things and use them to congratulate ourselves for the really hard work that we are doing now and all the things that we're going through. I wish that what we were going through were like simply pandemic and pandemic only, and it's you know, easy for me to say that as, you know, a white, straight, cisgender man with lots of privilege in different areas. The pandemic has been relatively easy for me in terms of my life going along. But adding to this pandemic, I mean, taking into account the brutal murders of innocent Black people, Black trans people, and what we are seeing from that. And I know we're not speaking about death per se, but we are talking about loss, and this is something that also I wish were new, but it's not, and we know that. So I think that when we think about the pandemic, when we think about what we know is happening in the world, that just frames where we are in terms of schools. Schools reflect our society, and what we value as a society is just mimicked in our schools. So I just want to, again, just acknowledge the tremendous loss that people have experienced, and schools are saying this, and if they're not, they need to. I mean, it's crazy that it took this long to say that Black Lives Matter, to say that Black trans lives matter. You know, we need to say this, and then we need to live it. And I hope that's something that I have a role in doing. In terms of schools, one way that I think we address loss and trauma in schools is through something that's called a trauma-informed school or a trauma-responsive school. And I'm going to kind of frame this through the 4 R's that are recognized by SAMHSA as sort of the 4 R's to trauma-responsive school system. And those 4 R's are to realize the prevalence of the impact of trauma. Just that we can say that we acknowledge this, that we know that trauma exists, and that we know the prevalence and the impact of that. The second R is to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma. So that, this third R, so that we can respond by integrating the trauma-informed principles that create a safe, nurturing, culturally affirming school environment. And this fourth one is to resist the re-traumatization. And I think that last one connects very strongly. I feel really deeply about the connection to that right now, which is that the re-traumatization can be real. And even with our best intentions and things like social emotional learning and mental health that we implement in schools, without stopping to honor culture, to honor people's historical backgrounds, their identities, without that cultural affirming piece, our things that are implemented with the best intentions can just become policing in schools. The SEL program that we implement can just become another form of compliance and obeying or something like this. So I think that schools work tirelessly on supporting student, staff, community wellness, and that we are looking deeply into trauma responsive schools, and that there's just this confluence of the pandemic as well as the anti-racist practices that we need to put into place.
Thank you so much. That's helpful to hear what our schools are doing, hopefully, to prepare for the students coming back and, you know, knowing and understanding and being responsive to everything that they've gone through and lost during these times. So that's really encouraging to hear. So I would like to now turn it over to Nick and Nico and ask you, you know, for kind of a first question that I think we're all wanting to hear is from you, Nico, to start. What did you, let's say last year at this time, you were finishing up your junior year of high school, probably watching some of your friends that were seniors graduate and go through all the rituals. What did you expect or imagine in your mind? Because we all do this all the time, right? We have a picture in our head about how things are going to go. So what did you envision or think your senior year was going to look like?
Go ahead. So I thought that when I saw my friends that was graduating last year, I thought, oh, that's going to be me on stage, and had everybody clapping for me, all my family would have came and saw me graduate, but now just disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because all my family was going to come. They already booked hotels, but now they had to cancel that. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely disappointing. And for you as a dad, Nick, I mean, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a big deal for us as a parent. I mean, you know, especially for me raising a young black male in society, to get him to, you know, 12th grade and graduating. He did well. He actually excelled. We're so proud of his achievement. Yeah, I mean, we were looking forward to that. It was funny last year, you know, one of his senior friends that were graduating, he's like, Dad, I want to go to the graduation and, you know, and hang out with him. And, you know, it was so crazy because I was, you know, they only give each student a certain amount of tickets for graduation. And so I was scrambling around trying to, you know, get tickets to get in, and we finally did. And we stayed from start to finish. And, you know, we didn't have family there. It was just, you know, some of his friends he wanted to support. So, you know, even just walking away and, you know, from the event, he did a lot of asking questions like, you know, is that, you know, just kind of how the whole process goes, and just, you know, just his excitement and looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you know, something, you know, with my mom, I mean, his grandmother, you know, she was so looking forward to experiencing that. He has a great grandmother that is still living. She's 95 years old, just turned 95 in May.
Wow.
And, you know, she saw him graduate from elementary school. She saw him graduate, go to, you know, from middle school. And we just knew, you know, that she was going to make it, you know, to see him graduate this year. And unfortunately, you know, she won't be able to attend the graduation. But yeah, I mean, you know, for me personally, it's been, you know, it's an unfortunate situation. I being that I'm a nurse and I'm a healthcare professional, I understand, you know, the necessity of what we're doing to stay safe and try to, you know, keep not only yourself but people that you come in contact with safe. So I get the necessity and why it's important. But that loss though is something that you just, you know, it's compounding, because when other things happen in your life, then you just kind of feel, man, eat that much more, like, man, you know, down about something that you wouldn't normally probably, you know, be affected by. It's just a compounded. It just seems like during this pandemic, it's just been a compounded, continual loss of things. Um,
Yeah.
so it's hard. I mean, I think it's a daily conversation. I mean, me and my wife speak daily about, you know, issues that we're dealing with and how we're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, you know, I'm definitely bummed. But
Yeah.
but the good thing about it is that they are doing, you know, we will have a semblance of a graduation. It will all be in our cars. It's going to be a parade. Next week, Wednesday, is the parade. And
Been seeing a lot of that. Yeah. And I think, you know, someone said in the chat box, disappointing is a good word. And it's so true, right? I mean, you've worked so hard and to get to this point. And I mean, even though you know this doesn't take away from any of that hard work or change the outcome in any way, but yeah, how disappointing to not have that celebration that you anticipated. And I'm wondering if, Pat, if you would talk a little bit to why some of those, you know, those rituals are so important, and not having them during this time, to, like, you know, why that might be so impactful.
Sure, you know, those are traditions that are in cultures. Different, you know, different cultures celebrate things different ways. But yet, when that's taken away from us, it just compounds the grief. And so we have a situation where Nico was looking forward to graduating. His parents were looking forward to graduating. His grandmother was looking forward. His relatives were looking forward, because this was a big day, and it is a big day. And he, you know, so many things have been lost, like proms have been lost. Senior cut day has been lost. All of those things that our seniors look forward to, and all of the things that the parents look forward to, seeing their child, if he or she is going to the prom, and the dresses, and the, you know, the tuxedos, and how many young women that I've spoken to were just devastated because they had already gotten their gowns for senior prom. And these are traditions that they've seen through the years of school. And then it's gone. It's a loss. And, you know, what do we do with that? We get angry. Sometimes our children act out, and we think, you know, what's going on? We get worried about them. Their behaviors can change. But they're angry, and they're disappointed, and they're grieving. And it will take a while to move through this, because there's so many losses. It's not just one. It's tradition. If we look at, I noticed that a number of people have had the death experience of either a family member or a friend. And we know that sometimes people couldn't be visited in hospitals. People couldn't visit in nursing homes. That's devastating. It's hard enough to go through that when you can do that, but to compound that with the fact of, you know, I couldn't say or be with that person is very difficult. And so all of these things really have made the grieving process much more complicated for many. And, you know, we have to think about, what do we do, and how do we manage that? How do we get through that? And we don't get through it. We work forward with it. We move along with it, but recognizing it and knowing that it's okay. It's normal to feel those feelings. It's normal to be angry. It's normal to be disappointed. those are feelings that you should have through this process. It can get complicated if we can't get through it and we get stuck. When we get stuck in our grief, that's when we can be have more issues to deal with. The complicated grief is when we really can't accept what's happened and we can't move forward. But yeah, it's a difficult time, and I want everyone that's attending to really think about the losses that you've had. And if you're feeling stressed, and if you're feeling sad, and you're feeling anxious, those are normal feelings right now.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to just, if I could just add something, you know, I just kind of recalled having a conversation with my wife one day, and I came home and, you know, I was getting inundated at work, and there was a lot going on at work. And, you know, I expressed to her that, you know, man, I just feel so heavy. You know, it's just the weight of everything. I mean, this is after the George Floyd situation, you know, and just, you know, talking to friends, talking to clients about that. It's just, there was just a heaviness to, you know, my state of mind. And, you know, for me and for my wife, you know, we have 4 kids. When you're dealing with loss and you're dealing with grief, but you have to continue to be strong for those other little people and other people in your life, you know, how do you really take the time to acknowledge your grief and your loss, but still be strong and be able to keep, you know, doing what you need to do for those people in your life? Because you have to, you know, you kind of, you know, we're so resilient as people, we have to just keep going and continuing to fight through whatever we're dealing with. And sometimes that's a very difficult thing.
It is. And, you know, one of the things that I heard you say prior to this was you and your wife are talking about the stresses that you're going through in your life. And that is key, that you keep those communications open and you continue to talk with your wife and your family about the difficult times. And also listen to your children. We might not have answers. We can make it as simple as we can, but the communication with your family and your wife is important. And yes, you do need to be strong, but I'm gonna encourage you to remember self-care is important. Because if you think about, and I use this example all the time, if you think about when you're in a plane, what do they tell you to do with the oxygen mask? Who do they tell you to put it on first?
Yourself.
Yeah. So you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself so that you're okay to help other people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You're okay to help your child put that oxygen mask on. Mm-hmm. So without self-care, whether that's be exercising, whether it's music, whether it's dancing at 8 o'clock at night, whether it's a cup of tea and it's alone time, those kinds of things are extremely important. And the rule is that when we don't have enough time to take care of ourselves, that's the time we have to make time to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of people putting that in the chat box too, saying self-care, so how important it is, self-compassion. And, you know, one of the things I was thinking about for you, Nick, you talked about you have 4 kids and they're all at really different developmental levels as well. So that poses an additional challenge there as well. You're going to talk to Nico in a different way than you talk to your 4-year-old. Right. And so I'm wondering, Andrew, is that something that you might be able to speak to a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. So there's certainly everything we want to talk to our kids at the age or developmental level that is appropriate for them, and leverage our strengths, and, you know, let's be honest about what our kids know, which is a lot. And I just want to go back to one thing that you mentioned, Nick, and I really appreciate that you said this about the resiliency and being resilient. And I really appreciate that. And I also want to speak to it because it's something that I wonder about, again, going back to schools where we know that resiliency is considered something that we can teach, so we can help, so people can move through trauma. And I also just want to disclose, like, for white educators and for other people who hold this frame of power, that are we just teaching kids to be resilient to our own oppression? Like, how much are we doing that? And at what point do we, as people in the power structure, own that and say that we are the ones who are vulnerabilizing students? We are the ones who are marginalizing, and that we can teach resilient strategies, which we certainly need. But if we keep speaking to the same kids, if we're continue to tell, Black male students that you need to be resilient, that you can navigate your day in my school system, then, like, we need to look at that ourselves also. So that's just something that I think about, and I think that the resilience piece we need, but we also need to look at how we're teaching it and, like, the why behind it. In terms of speaking to kids and the rites of passage piece, Jenna, back to your question, I think what do the rites of passage represent? And I think they sort of represent the success of one piece and then this transformation into the next. So it's like the looking forward to what was coming next, that sort of freedom that we might have been experiencing at whatever that next stage was, whether it was going from preschool to kindergarten, or from 5th grade to middle school, or from high school into college. And, like, for LGBTQ youth, what that represented in Pride in June, in a time that is supposed to be a coming together, like a physical gathering of people to celebrate LGBTQ pride and freedom and these things that were really put on hold. And again, thinking about students who often look forward to that, and, like, LGBTQ who look forward to the Pride prom as, like, this beacon of light at the end of the school year. So what can we do instead? Well, we can still be together as much as possible. We can still ensure community. We can do as much within our homes and through virtual formats that we can maintain connections, even if we can't be there in person. So I think relationships are things that we can control, and that's one great place to really put the attention into, to say that we're still here, we still care, there are things that we can replicate. And in terms of talking to kids, I think it's acknowledging and affirming what they're experiencing. This is, whether it seems like it's something small, like the loss of a field trip, or it seems like it's something that's bigger, like the loss of an event or a family member, that's still loss. And that's okay, as Pat said so well, which is that loss is loss, and that we can acknowledge that.
Just one other thing I want to add to that is making sure that you can share with your partner or with your friends what your needs are. Sometimes we think that people can figure out what we need without asking for it, and then we kind of get upset when our needs are not being met. So it's really that time of communication and checking in with each other. Just checking in and saying, how was your day? And being honest, being as honest as you can, both Nico with your dad and with Nick with you, with your children. Going back to what Andrew said, your 4-year-old, is it a 4-year-old, Nick?
Yep.
Four?
My
Yeah.
youngest is 4, yeah.
Yeah, developmentally, she's going to not understand things the way Nico is. Nico is more as the adult, and what does this all mean, Dad? And going back to what Andrew said, in these most disturbing times of violence in the Black community, it's got to be weighing, as you said, you feel heavy with all of the things that are going on right now, and making sure that you continue to check in with each other, because that's really important. And it's important for everyone that has joined us tonight to make sure and do a lot of listening right now. We don't have to have answers, but we need to be good listeners.
When you were talking, it made me think of one of the things that we had talked about in preparing for tonight that I thought was really important and might be interesting for people to hear about is just you had talked about anticipatory grief and how everything that's going on right now might be contributing to that. And that is something that maybe not everybody has heard of before. So I would love if you could talk a little about that.
Sure. You know, part of what causes us to be very anxious is our fear of what's coming, fear of the unknown. So if we think about the losses that we've had and things that we're anticipating we're going to lose or we may lose, this is definitely a concern, especially right now with parents of children of color. The anticipation of, is my child going to come home? Is my child going to get arrested? So those anticipatory fears is something that we need to pay attention to too, because that can cause us a lot of anxiety. Anxiety really comes from trying to control things that we anticipate are going to happen and we have no control over. So anticipating certain events can cause us a lot of stress. If we look at it in the relationship of illness and death, you know, when we're a caregiver for someone who is extremely ill, we anticipate that death and we are preparing for it every day. Yet when it comes, I don't know as we're ever really prepared. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. One of the other things that we wanted to talk about were some of the risk factors that we want to be aware of that might predispose someone to having a more intense grief reaction. And I mean, I'm even thinking about some of what you were talking about before, just in regards to, you know, different classes of individuals who may be, you know, the LGBTQ community or, you know, people of color, and, you know, what's going on right now might be intensifying the reactions that people are having and their experience of loss.
Yeah. You know, every time someone dies in our life, we experience that, or when we have significant loss, those are all triggers to things that we have grieved before. So when we, certain times in our life, because we're going to experience these types, not particularly a pandemic, but losses and death throughout our lifetime. And when we grieve, we usually don't grieve just that one loss, that one death, but we grieve past experiences too. And we bring up memories, and we think about things if that happened to us in the past. And kind of goes with the trauma, Andrew, I would think, is to how did the death occur, or what kind of a loss was it, and how traumatized was one? You know, I often think, and I'm interested in hearing what Andrew has to say, but we often think about trauma as this horrible, traumatic event. But yet trauma can happen in small events too, where we also have reactions to that. How do we judge my trauma from your trauma based on, you know, your range of sensitivities, your range of experiences, your range of attachment to, you know, those people in your life? So trauma, I think, is very fluid, and I'd be interested in hearing what Andrew has to say on that.
Thanks, Pat. I agree with you. I mean, from my knowledge in trauma, I'm not an expert on trauma, but I know it to be, you know, it's an encounter of like an out of control, frightening experience. So, and in terms of what the brain knows about it, I think it's something that gets the amygdala going. So it's like, that's the fight, flight, or freeze thing. So like, that's the single event time. And then of course there's chronic stress and chronic trauma where, you know, the brain reacts and the amygdala recognizes even the situations that are not trauma as they might seem to be trauma. So, but yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's not about like what we consider to be the size and scope of it, like whether it's small or big. It's the fact that it's trauma, and that's how our brain reacts. So it's like the neuroplasticity of like, how do we cope and how do we deal with that is important no matter what the trauma is.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine many of our students and our parents and our communities have been traumatized by this whole situation. And now on top of that, we have, you know, the death of George Floyd and Mr. Brooks, so, and many others. And so it just compounds the trauma. And, you know, what does that mean for our students? And again, I just want to encourage parents to really keep those lines of communication open, validate your children's feelings, because a lot of times we think, oh, just get over it. They need to be listened to, especially now, because what's important to them, if you have children that are talking to you and complaining, it's okay. Just listen to them and validate them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yes.
oh, sorry, I was just going to add, if there was like one thing that schools could focus on, even when we're in this virtual world, I think it's relationships. You know, it's the connection, it's the positive adult relationships, and every child knows that there is someone there that cares for them, that they trust, that they can go to. And that is something that as educators, like when it's overwhelming for us, and same I would think for mental health clinicians and nurses and such, but that if you can have positive relationship, if you have that trusting relationship with a student, that's like just a great thing that you can do, even virtually.
And what's, you know, to add to that, Andrew, I'm glad you brought that up, you know, to add to this, when we experience the death of someone close to us during this process, you know, those things like hugs and those things like getting together have been taken away also. And we know that part of the healing process of the grieving process is building relationships, rebuilding relationships with people, talking with friends, visiting with friends, getting those hugs. And that is something that has only complicated where we are.
Yeah. And I think, Nick, you're back, right? Are you?
I'm back.
We're
back.
Okay, great. So just playing off of that, I'm wondering if you guys could share a little bit of what has helped you during this time. What has helped you guys navigate? And have you found anything that's been particularly useful in coping with this? Or I don't know, youth are oftentimes like the most creative in coming up with, you know, workarounds or things. So would love to hear what you've done, Nico, and how you've gotten through this time.
I've been usually finding stuff on my phone to keep me busy, and trying to finish in my rest of my high school, my work that I have left to do, and getting ready for the next step after high school.
Yeah, so just keeping your mind, it sounds like you're really keeping yourself occupied, looking for things to keep you busy, and yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, me personally, I'm like a music junkie, so you know, I like all different types of genre of music. So during this time being, you know, quarantine isolated, I've had the opportunity to explore a lot more, you know, new music. You know, especially while I'm working, I like to have some, you know, light music going in the background, and it usually kind of calms me and keeps me in a good place. So that's one thing I'm doing. You know, I definitely have, you know, me and my wife have kind of altered our or adjusted, you know, our nutrition. We've been more focused on our nutrition as of late. You know, doing things to try to boost the immune system and keep the immune system as strong as possible, which has lent itself to, you know, just in general information, knowledge that previously you know, wasn't, I guess, wasn't a mainstay in my life. So now, you know, kind of like introducing a different way of life, or exposing myself to focus more on nutrition and trying to make sure I get those you know, keep that as something that is new to me. You know, I never I mean, I don't eat terribly, but, just really actively focusing on your nutrition and your health is something that we've kind of been doing as a couple
That's
together,
good advice.
which is interesting, which is interesting and new and, lending itself some difference in our life at this point.
Good.
Yeah, I
Thank
mean,
you. That's
with
good. I think we could all use that advice. I
yeah.
think there's been a lot of people who have said the opposite, like this quarantine or time has led to some unhealthy habits. So it's fantastic. You're a good example for us to go off.
Yeah, it's like, you got to get creative. You can't, I mean, I don't want to, first of all, I don't want to go to, most restaurants are kind of closed and fast food is no good. So you kind of, those are really your only options at the moment. Well, some restaurants starting to open back up, but until then it was like, all right, we gotta, cook more. I just,
Sure. That's great.
so that's a good thing.
A lot of times good comes out of things like this, changes of, routines and changes of habits. And sometimes I know that there's a lot of discussion about people that are just ready to leave each other in this quarantine because they're spending so much time together. But then other people are getting closer and really getting to know themselves and getting to know others. And nutrition, Nick, is a wonderful thing. Making sure you get enough sleep and your nutrition is good, and exercise and all of those things for self-care is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thanks for sharing that tip for all our parents on the line, and maybe for any of us. We're really getting close to time here. This hour went by so quickly. So I'm wondering if maybe we could have also we had two questions about maybe some resources for faculty and staff. I'm assuming that question was focused on schools, and then also resources for parents. So I'm wondering if maybe each of you could offer up some, just resources that might be helpful to people who want to continue learning about this, or from both the school perspective and then for parents.
Andrew, do you have
Sure, yeah. I think the best way, I was planning on sharing them with you, Jenna, so I'm not sure if that can be emailed after. I mean, there's some
Absolutely.
great people okay, yeah. So for like
For
the school folks from like the National Association for School Psychologists, from the different organizations that support schools, so I'm happy to share those. I don't think the strategies and things we've sort of talked about here. And I'll just add that one of them is also, I think that I'll represent the other end of that spectrum, Nick, and I had very delicious cheesecake for dinner that my fiance made. So I also want to just say that I think it's also okay to acknowledge a lower capacity, and that's okay too, or at least that's what I've been telling myself. So it's great that you're on the nutrition end and I'll represent for the other side.
Thanks for saying that and giving us all a little bit of permission.
There's very little right or wrong here. We do what we can do and we take care of ourselves. And I'm happy to send you, Jenna, some resources on grief and loss, and you can send that out too.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're going to send out the link to this recording, and we can definitely include those resources with it. So everybody who is on right now who would benefit from that, you'll receive it in the next couple of days.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So Nico, one last question for you. What would you say to the parents who are listening right now, who maybe have a kid who's in your position? What would you tell them? What's your advice for them of how, what would be really helpful? What can they do to help their kids?
I'll tell them to just stay positive, just keep moving forward, just wait until wait until the pandemic is washed away, and just wait. That's all we could do.
Wait.
Wait, wait.
Patient.
The real test in patience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, just to kind of piggyback on what he said, you know, I think it's important, you know, to listen to them, you know, to really just kind of, you know, allow them to express how they're feeling about it. You know, my 4-year-old, I mean, I couldn't, you know, we've been saying it in the house to each other. You know, I'm talking to my wife about the coronavirus, COVID-19, this and that. So when the 4-year-old one day just says, you know, because we were leaving, we're gonna go outside, and he hadn't been outside in a while, and so we were like, you know, Nicole, would you like to come to the grocery store with us? He says, I don't want to go out with the coronavirus.
Mhm.
I mean, it just was amazing that he, you know, took that in enough where he could speak that like that. He didn't say COVID-19. He, you know, he actually said the coronavirus because it is something that they're dealing with too, and in acknowledging. And it's just, you know, it's just amazing, you know, even at that level, they understand the difference. They know that they're not seeing their friends every day. You know, for me, asking him, hey, do you miss your friends? You know, what do you know, you want to see your friends? Or we try to make little, you know, Zoom meetings with some of his friends. And, you know, initially when he got on the Zoom and we're connecting with them, he had a hard time because he, you know, he just didn't understand the concept, I guess, or
Mhm.
it didn't seem the same, you know, it was kind of distant. And, you know, just explaining to him, well, this is something that kind of help us through this time. You know, it's not forever, you know, but it's something that we can do to kind of stay connected to our friends and the people that we care about until we can be back together with them. And
Right.
he was able to process that and understand that and look forward to the next time.
Well, you've
And
really demonstrated the importance of communication, and I think that is key. We've heard that a couple of times tonight, and you're a great example of doing that. You know, how you're communicating with your wife, you're communicating with your kids, you're meeting them at their developmental level to help them understand from their own perspective, you know, what's going on, and even sharing a little bit about what you're feeling too. So I think that's so helpful, and I think will encourage other people too, that's one of the best things we can do right now, because like Nico said, what do we have to do? We have to wait, but we can talk during that time, and we can still, you know, communicate with each other, let each other know what we need, you know, reflecting what Pat and Andrew said. So we are out of time at this point. So I just want to thank all of you for being part of this, for sharing your experience, your expertise, really helping us think through this and what we can do as parents, as mental health professionals, as educators, and really thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you to everybody who participated tonight. We really appreciate you being here, and we just want to remind you that we at MHA, we are also here for you, and we want to make sure that you know that if anybody, you know, that's listening now knows someone or is personally experiencing a real increase in anxiety, depression, just really struggling with this time, as so many people are, we just wanted to make sure you have this information, can give it to anybody who needs it, or use it yourself. We have clinic services that are operating right now. Nick's one of our nurses in the clinic. We have therapists. We're providing telehealth services, so you don't have to worry about leaving your home or coming out and feeling unsafe. The number for the clinic services is right there on the screen in front of you. And then we also have a community connection support line, which was newly launched in the last few months, really just for people who are looking for a friendly conversation. You know, during this time where you can't be out and about, sometimes we miss out on those conversations with our, you know, a cashier or the bank teller, or, you know, just out and about, seeing people. And so we wanted to create this line just to give people someone to talk to when they need it, just in case they don't have a lot of opportunity to do that personally in their own networks. So with that, I'm going to just say thank you again to everybody, and we hope you'll join us for our next community conversation.